Well, everyone, good evening and welcome. Welcome to the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation and Museum here in Washington, D.C. We're so delighted to have the Ferrer family with us this evening. Our mission at the Victims of Communism Foundation is to commemorate the 100 million men and women who were murdered by communists in the past, but also to be an advocate for the liberty of those still held captive by totalitarian regimes today. And that happens in places like Cuba and in China and North Korea. And there are people in communist legacy countries that have terrible regimes that we often don't think about, places like Eritrea, or the violence that's perpetrated by Russia and Ukraine today. And so this event, a chance to recognize a true hero, someone who stood up against tyranny and oppression, is right in the DNA of what we believe in and what we do at VOC. We have a number of distinguished guests with us. I just want to mention a few of them with us. We're delighted to have the Lithuanian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Kęstutis Budrys, with us tonight. Welcome, sir. We're delighted to have the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State, Christopher Landau, with us. Welcome, sir. Also delighted to have the Ambassador of the Republic of Lithuania to the United States, Mr. Gediminas Varvalis, with us tonight. The Chairman and the Founding Director of the Victims of Communism Museum, Dr. Elizabeth Spalding. A member of our Board of Trustees, a longtime public servant, the Honorable Bruce Weinrod, is with us tonight. Our VOC President Emeritus, our good friend, Ambassador Andrew Brimberg. And of course, our distinguished guest, Mr. Ferrer. So glad that you're with us tonight. We will hear from some of our distinguished guests, and then a bit later we will have the re-awarding of the Truman-Reagan Medal of Freedom to Mr. Ferrer. And then later, we will close the ending with a toast. We have a tradition of a toast to an awardee of this magnitude. And so at the end of our short program, we'll head to the lobby on the second floor and close the program with a toast. Well, would you help me in welcoming to the podium the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Republic of Lithuania, Mr. Kęstutis Budrys. Welcome.
Mr. Deputy Secretary, Your Excellencies, Ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, this is such a touching moment and reason to come back to Victims of Communism Museum. And I acknowledge your huge role, not only in bringing the crimes of the communist regime, but also bringing the case of the communism still being the evil in the globe that we face. The evil within the authoritarian regimes that still oppress people. And this is the reason why we have here, on this occasion, the hero that is together with us. And another reminder why our course is not over. Why we still have to mobilize ourselves and to continue on putting pressure till it will be the final end. And it's not the end yet. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is, once again, an honor to be here today, celebrating the accomplishments of men who bravely stands tall against the oppressive regime and bravely fights for the ideals of justice and freedom. Your story is remarkable, your courage is admirable, your cause is most noble. Lithuanians and Cubans are united by the shared experience of fighting for freedom and democracy and striving to break free from communist occupation. On behalf of the government of Lithuania, I salute Mr. José Daniel Ferrer and wish him an enduring spirit of strength and steadfastness. I thank the government of the United States of America for facilitating Mr. Ferrer's release and travel to the United States, where he can continue his fight against the oppressive regime. Thank you. Like the United States, Lithuania faces authoritarian regimes across its borders. Russia is fighting a war of aggression against Ukraine and undermines regional stability. Its proxy regime in Belarus is escalating with hybrid threats. We provide support and safe haven to people persecuted by authoritarian regimes in neighboring countries, as well as to their opposition activists and democratic institutions, the same way as the United States does. For nearly a decade, Lithuania has hosted the Free Russia Forum, a biannual conference for the Russian opposition leaders. Tens of thousands of Belarusians, including the democratic movement leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, have found refuge in Lithuania. The Lithuanian government has facilitated the transfer of over 100 Lithuanian nationals fleeing instability in authoritarian Venezuela. Ladies and gentlemen, Lithuania is and will continue to be a staunch fighter for democracy by human rights and human rights. Lithuania will continue to support Cuban human rights activists and pro-democracy movement. We demand the immediate and unconditional release of all political prisoners imprisoned in Cuba, and we call for an immediate end to the current unlawful house arrest of pro-democracy activists, independent journalists, and artists. Lithuania holds the strictest position among all EU member states regarding Cuba and is dedicated to intensifying its efforts against the Cuban regime. Lithuania will continue to exercise political pressure on the Cuban regime. We support additional sanctions targeting Cuban officials responsible for repressing peaceful protesters. We will raise the issue of human rights in Cuba at the Human Rights Council. We will mobilize stronger support of European Parliament resolutions condemning human rights violations in Cuba and seeking the regime's accountability. Ladies and gentlemen, the United States of America is a leader of the democratic world and a strategic partner of Lithuania. We cherish our alliance. Lithuania is grateful to the United States for its policy of non-recognition of occupation by Soviets. Thanks to our democratic ideals and the support of our allies, Lithuania is a free and democratic nation right now. I'm confident that one day all the Cuba will be freed from communists and the people of Cuba will have the opportunities that Lithuanians had. To build a strong country, build strong institutions, build freedom and democracy, and be a strong ally of the United States. So I really wish it, and it's really my honor to be in this ceremony. Thank you all.
Thank you much, Minister, for that fantastic address. Allow me to introduce the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State, Mr. Christopher Landau.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And first, let me just thank those of you who had the vision for this Victims of Communism Museum right here in the heart of Washington, D.C. I think communism has been one of the worst things to happen to mankind, and yet it is an evil that no matter how discredited and no matter how shameful all the facts that we know about it, doesn't seem to go away. In fact, I think the historical testimony of a place like this is particularly important in a day like a moment like this, when we see people in the United States and other parts of the world with short memories voting for people who are outright communists or very sympathetic to communists and have a completely revisionist historical attitude. That is an attitude of complete ignorance. And I think just as we have a Holocaust Memorial Museum here in Washington to remember that terrible event, I think it is very, very fitting that we have this very imposing building here in Washington to remember the terrible crimes committed in the name of communism and that are still being committed today. And I think this is why it is so important that we recognize this great honor of José Daniel Ferrer and the courage that it's taking today, in the year of our Lord 2025, for people to say, I am not going to put up with this anymore. And I'm going to put my own life, God put us on this earth, and some people say there's some causes that are bigger than any of us and that are worth sacrificing our own lives and our own liberty. I feel very blessed. I was born an American, so I never had to face the moral choice of complicity with an evil regime versus sacrificing my own liberty and prosperity. And I hold in the greatest regard and respect people who grew up in a communist system, who actually had the bravery to put their principles ahead of their own personal comfort and their family's personal comfort. So I think it is so fitting that this Victims of Communism Museum is honoring José Daniel Ferrer. If I might just say a few words directly to Mr. Ferrer in Spanish, I would ask for your indulgence for those of you who don't speak Spanish. I grew up in Latin America, so the struggle of Cuba is something that is very meaningful to my heart. Señor Ferrer, realmente le admiro muchísimo lo que usted ha hecho. La lucha del pueblo cubano para la libertad es la misma lucha de todos nosotros que queremos la libertad y que creemos en la libertad. Y realmente para nosotros, para la administración del presidente Trump, como usted sabe, para el secretario Rubio y para mí personalmente, hay pocos temas en todo el mundo que nos interesan tanto que el futuro de Cuba, que el pueblo de Cuba realmente pueda decidir. Y realmente le admiramos a usted y sus compatriotas que luchan día a día por la libertad y que dejen que incluso que se encarcelen, que arriesgan sus propias vidas y las vidas de su familia para la causa de la libertad. Hoy en día no tenemos muchos héroes en el mundo, pero usted realmente es uno de los grandes héroes de nuestros tiempos y para mí es un enorme honor encontrarme en su presencia. De todo corazón, le admiro muchísimo. So, I just think it is so important that the United States engage with countries like Lithuania to see what we can do to end the scourge of communism. I first spoke to the foreign minister a few weeks ago when the UN vote on Cuba sanctions was coming up at the UN. And I said, Mr. Minister, how can this be that a country like Lithuania, who knows better than anybody what communism is about, would be voting with Cuba and not with the United States on the United States economic policy towards Cuba, which obviously seeks to limit U.S. economic activity towards the island in order to prevent the entrenchment of that immoral and illegitimate regime. And the foreign minister, to his credit, says, I totally hear you on that. We've voted the other way for many years, along with our other European countries. But let me reconsider this, and let me go and talk to my friends in Europe. And sure enough, for the first time ever, I think Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Poland, Moldova, Ukraine, Romania, voted to abstain this time. Hopefully next year we'll get a positive vote our way, but there's always room for improvement. But that was already a big change, and I give you credit for that. But I don't see how these countries in Western Europe can be voting with Cuba against the United States. It just makes my head spin. And believe me, I have been working the phone. I have been saying, I'm not going to wait until the week before that vote next year to start picking this up. I'm going to make it very clear that this is something that is a critical part of our bilateral relationship with all these other countries. And so this isn't going to be something that they hear about once a year. It's going to be something they hear about all the time. And I've already, I think, caused quite a bit of surprise and consternation among some European and Latin American ambassadors at my ferocity on this issue. But I think it's something that the United States should take much more seriously. Having a hostile, anti-American communist regime just 70 miles from our shore is unthinkable. I mean, Cuba was offering the Soviet Union a pad to launch missiles against the United States during, in the early 60s, in the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, this is a major national security threat, and I don't know how we just came to accept the continued presence of this hostile and repressive regime right on our doorstep. But let me make it very clear, in this administration, we do not accept that. We do not take that for granted. And so, I think you're going to see a very different foreign policy out of this administration. You're seeing it already. And again, I'm very grateful for the cooperation of countries like Lithuania that I think we're kind of like, well, how come nobody's ever called us before on this? And that's a pretty good question. I don't know the answer to that, but I do think the winds of change are blowing in many parts of the world. I just got back last night from Bolivia, where we saw a country that was very much in the camp of Cuba and Venezuela, Nicaragua, a very anti-American left-wing camp. The voters overwhelmingly rejected the failed policies of that government. And today, it was actually interesting, it was the first day that the new Bolivian government really was able to occupy the offices of the government, and all the files were gone. I mean, the offices, there was not one piece of paper in any of the ministries. They took everything with them. They destroyed everything to try to cover up their many crimes. So, again, I just think there are few things that give me greater pleasure in my job than to be able to acknowledge the struggle and the heroism of those around the world who have fought against communism, and in particular, the heroism of José Daniel Ferrer, who fought against communism, who fights against communism in Cuba. And I look forward to the day that we can walk the streets of a free Havana together. God bless you, sir. God bless all of you. Thank you very much.
Well, in a moment, we are going to give that award. But who is this person that we're talking about tonight? Many of you are here because you know this story, but for those who are watching and things, what does it take to be a hero in the terms that the Deputy Secretary just talked about? This weekend, we celebrated, or we commemorated, Victims of Communism Day, November 7th. And about 10 U.S. states and many places around the world recognize Victims of Communism Day for solemn observance. That's the day when Lenin and his conspirators took over the elected democratic parliament of Russia and imposed communism by force there, and then tried to spread it around the world. And what does a victim look like? Someone who's victimized by that regime or another one? Well, it's someone who's taken away from his family and thrown in prison. It's someone who goes to prison with his own brother, both of them being champions for liberty. It's someone who the Cuban administration tried to make a deal with. We'll let you out. You just have to leave. And says, I'm not leaving. I'm coming back to fight for liberty again. A hero is someone who works for another hero, like Oswaldo Payá, who is murdered by the regime and says, I'm coming back. We could continue. This is the type of heroism that we have seen from our honoree tonight. And it's in a great tradition. It's in a tradition of people like Václav Havel. It's in a great tradition of Oswaldo Payá and many, many, many others that we don't have time to name tonight. And of course, you have many champions in the West. Champions like President Truman and President Reagan, for whom this award is named. So please help me welcome the chairman of our board of directors to say a bit about the award and to award it tonight, Dr. Elizabeth Spalding.
Why does the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation give this award? Over 25 years ago, my late father and VOC co-founder Lee Edwards and I, along with my late mother Anne and my husband Matthew, had multiple conversations about the need for VOC, then still in its early years, to bestow an award. We decided that the first and now oldest VOC award should be a Lifetime Achievement Award. And so, since 1999, the Truman-Reagan Medal of Freedom is awarded to those who have demonstrated a lifelong commitment to freedom and democracy and opposition to communism and all other forms of totalitarianism. José Daniel Ferrer, our honoree from 2020, and now here with us today, praise God, is proof of that commitment. He is one of a special subset of laureates, those who have personally and cruelly suffered under communism, including Bukovsky, Wei, Sharansky, Valladares, Nguyen Lee, Paya, and still in prison, Lai. When VOC honored Ferrer in 2020, he was, as we've heard, unjustly imprisoned in the network of prisons aptly called the Cuba Gulag. He was incarcerated for pro-freedom activities, and so the award was given in absentia. It was our way of reminding and educating the world about the continuing evil and crimes of Cuban communism and the peaceful democratic alternatives proposed by Ferrer and other Cuban freedom champions. And why Harry Truman and Ronald Reagan for this award? We wanted the name or names on the award to be recognizable to a broad audience. We decided the name or names should be both American and international, since we are an American organization focused on the rights of freedom and the crimes of communism around the world. Given my father's and my respective scholarship, Reagan came easily. This was the late 1990s, and we believed that Reagan and his moral clarity, political determination, and successful policies were major factors in the fall of communism behind the Iron Curtain. Plus, Reagan always looked to the past and looked ahead. While we could hope that VOC would one day be giving awards only for past commitment, we knew that communists cling to their ideology and power. Our laureate here today will not stop fighting for his own people and country, and for all others who are still subject to the systemic tyranny of communism. We must all keep fighting and looking ahead in this fight for freedom and against communism. VOC is a nonpartisan organization that was authorized by a unanimous act of Congress in 1993, so it made sense to pair Reagan with a Democrat. John F. Kennedy, George Meany, and Henry Scoop Jackson all came up as possibilities. But we argued for Reagan's presidential bookend in the Cold War. And so in the 1940s, Truman helped win World War II and then identified and faced aggressive Soviet and Asian communism. His multifaceted Cold War strategy stopped the spread of communism behind the iron and bamboo curtains. And before and like Reagan, Truman possessed a moral clarity and political commitment that resulted in successful policies and institutions to defend freedom and combat communism. The Truman-Reagan Medal of Freedom is grounded in the understanding that our rights are not from government, but from the laws of nature and of nature's God, and are secured by just government, that freedom is precious, and that democracy is not perfect, in part because man is not perfect. In the immortal words of Churchill, democracy is the worst form of government except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time. Our honoree knows all this to be true and has devoted his life to fighting for freedom and democracy within a totalitarian regime. We marvel at Ferrer's moral clarity, his courage, his endurance, his witness, his character, as we thank and honor him. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, here at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, I give you José Daniel Ferrer, our 2020 Truman-Reagan Medal of Freedom laureate.
Muy emocionado. Es difícil articular un párrafo, un discurso con tantas emociones. Gracias a todos. Gracias a todos. Muy emotivas palabras he escuchado esta tarde y créanme que nunca pensé recibir de personas tan comprometidas con la defensa de la libertad y la democracia en el mundo tan emocionantes palabras. Créanme que si de pequeño lo hubiese sabido, hubiese empezado a enfrentarme al comunismo desde los 10 años.
Thank you. I will start translating, sorry. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for the moving words that each of the speakers gave today. If he knew, he says, that if he knew how emotional and engaged everyone was going to be for democracy, not only in Cuba but in the world, maybe he would have started earlier in life, around when he was 10 years old or so, to fight communism in Cuba.
Siempre he creído que cuando nos invitan, cuando uno es quien recibe el honor en un evento de la importancia de este que hoy está teniendo lugar acá, uno debe de preparar un muy buen discurso, pero desgraciadamente no tuve tiempo, así que me quedo con unos apuntes que voy a tratar de desarrollar.
I think that every time one is honored to speak and to receive such an honor in an important event and place like this one should prepare a speech, but I've been very busy and I was not able to prepare a great speech, but I have some pointers here that I want to share with you.
Además de agradecerle al ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de Lituania, nación siempre comprometida con la defensa de la libertad y desde una posición geográfica muy peligrosa, frontera con Rusia, frontera con el régimen de Vladimir Putin.
I want to start by thanking the Foreign Affairs Minister of Lithuania for being here, and to all Lithuanian nation, because this country is really compromised with freedom and democracy, fighting for freedom and democracy in the world, in a geographically sort of like not so safe position, since Russia and Vladimir Putin's regime is just in their border.
Hay que ser un pueblo muy valiente para desde esa posición defender la libertad, la democracia y los derechos humanos.
You're going to be a very, very brave nation to defend democracy and human rights from that position.
También agradezco enormemente las emotivas palabras del representante de los Estados Unidos de Norteamérica.
I also want to thank Deputy Secretary Landau for his very emotive words.
Las palabras en inglés me las tradujo Yuri y calaron profundo, pero las palabras en español son de esas que nunca se olvidan.
The words in English were translated by Yuri Perez, and they really got to me. But the words in Spanish are those words that you never forget.
Así que gracias a ambos y también a la Fundación Memorial Víctimas del Comunismo por la oportunidad de hoy recibir esta importante medalla, este importantísimo premio que me otorgaron en 2020, pero que no pude recibir en ese momento por razones que ya se han explicado. Los últimos años, casi por completo, lo pasé en una tenebrosa prisión comunista en el oriente de mi patria.
Thank you both, and thank you for Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation for having me today, but also for honored me with this medal that was sort of given to me in 2020, but that I was not able to receive for reasons that have been already explained. For the past years, I have been living in a communist jail, and I haven't been able to move freely around the world.
Me honraron en aquel momento, honraron a los presos políticos cubanos y a todas las víctimas del comunismo en Cuba.
I was honored in 2020, and also they honored Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, also honored the rest of the political prisoners in Cuba and the victims around the world.
Y nos vuelven a honrar hoy con este evento y con la oportunidad tanto para mi esposa y mi pequeño hijo Daniel José compartir con personas muy comprometidas con la libertad, la democracia y el respeto a los derechos humanos. Personas muy solidarias.
You honored me back then, and you're honoring me today also to give me the opportunity to receive the medal, but also to be here with you, my wife and my son, Daniel José, to share with people that truly believe in democracy and freedom.
En Cuba tenemos la suerte de tener como apóstol o considerar como apóstol de nuestra independencia a José Martí, un hombre muy inteligente, un hombre de ideas muy profundas. Muchos años antes de que los bolcheviques tomasen el poder en Rusia, ya Martí había alertado sobre el peligro que representaba el comunismo, las ideas de la extrema izquierda.
In Cuba, we're lucky to have José Martí as one of our founding fathers, a man of deep ideas that even before the Bolsheviks took over Russia, he had already warned the Cubans and the world about the dangers of communism and what it does to its people.
En un artículo que escribió donde analizaba un tratado del filósofo inglés Herbert Spencer, coincidía con este en que con semejante socialismo al que todo parecía tender en Inglaterra, la miseria y la servidumbre serían palpable y grande.
In an article that he wrote with Herbert Spencer, British philosopher, They both coincide in the fact that communism, when it's the practice, or put in practice, just brings servitude and impoverishment of the people.
También decía que con semejante sistema los funcionarios terminarían abusando de la plebe cansada y trabajadora.
He also said that with this system, people that worked in government would end up abusing the people or the nation that will be forced to work for the state and not, the other way.
Él, como Spencer, estaba completamente convencido que con semejante sistema o que semejante sistema sería o no tendría otro nombre mejor que el de futura esclavitud.
He and Spencer concluded together that this system, communism, should be also called future slavery.
El valor de sus proféticas palabras se puso de manifiesto luego con el triunfo de los comunistas en la Unión Soviética, en Rusia y las demás repúblicas soviéticas, en las naciones de Europa Oriental, a las que Stalin le impuso el comunismo luego del fin de la Segunda Guerra Mundial. Y lo hemos visto también en China, Corea del Norte, Vietnam, Laos, Cuba y ahora con los neocomunistas de Venezuela y Nicaragua.
His words came to be like a prophecy after communists took over Russia and the rest of the Soviet countries and all of Eastern Europe. But also we can see how prophetic and true those words were when we see what's going on in China, North Korea, and with the neo-communist countries like Venezuela and Nicaragua.
Otra importantísima frase profética también de José Martí dice lo siguiente: dos peligros tiene la idea socialista, como tantas otras, el de las lecturas extranjerizas, confusas e incompletas, y el de la soberbia y rabia disimulada de los ambiciosos, que para hallar hombros sobre los cuales alzarse, comienzan por fingirse frenéticos defensores de los menesterosos.
Other words that are prophetic from José Martí says that two ideas from socialism that are very, or makes it very clear that is dangerous, is that they use their angerment, they change it, and they sell it as they are trying to help the people or the poor, the most needed, to build over their shoulders their own regime.
Sin duda, no hubo mejor retrato que el que Martí hizo con esas palabras a individuos como Fidel Castro, Hugo Chávez, Nicolás Maduro, Daniel Ortega, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, Gustavo Petro, los Kirchner en Argentina, Lula en Brasil, entre otros.
The words from José Martí really paint a portrait of these neo-communist leaders like Hugo Chávez, but also Fidel Castro, Gustavo Petro, and other communist countries that are turning in Latin America.
Luego del fin de la Guerra Fría, muchos creyeron que ya el comunismo no era cuestión que preocupase a la humanidad.
After the Cold War, a lot of people thought communism was not an issue anymore.
Yo también lo creí.
I also thought that was the case.
Luego de la caída del muro de Berlín y la desintegración de la Unión Soviética, pensé que el régimen cubano no duraría 2 años más.
After the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of the Soviet Union, I really thought the Cuban regime wouldn't last 2 more years.
Incluso fui tan optimista, quizás producto de que era muy joven, que pensé que también en China y Vietnam, al menos, no lo creía o no me sentía tan seguro de Corea del Norte. Pero también pensé que si caía el comunismo en China y en Vietnam, terminaría cayendo también en Norcorea.
I was so optimistic, probably because I was young, that I thought communism could also fall really quickly in China and Vietnam. And although I wasn't that optimistic about North Korea, I thought, well, if it falls in China and Vietnam, probably North Korea will also be free.
Sin embargo, el comunismo sigue presente en China y China es una nación sin derechos, sin libertad, sin democracia. También sucede en Vietnam, Laos, Corea del Norte y por desgracia sigue sucediendo también en mi patria, en Cuba.
But sadly, communism is still in China, a country with no real freedom, no democracy. It's still in Vietnam, Laos, and sadly, it's still in my homeland, Cuba.
Y hemos visto cómo, con el apoyo de estos regímenes, implantaron en Venezuela un régimen que acostumbro a definir como neocomunista. De igual manera, con la vuelta de Daniel Ortega, a Nicaragua, vimos también lo que pasó durante 20 años en Bolivia. Por suerte, terminó el reinado del MAS.
The support of these regimes, like the Cuban, have made it spread into neo-communist countries like Venezuela or Nicaragua with Ortega, and for 20 years in Bolivia, although now we see how the regime of the MAS is down.
La lección está bien clara. El comunismo sigue siendo un gran peligro para la humanidad.
The lesson is very clear. Communism is still a dangerous ideology for humanity.
En alguna ocasión leí que se le atribuía a Winston Churchill una frase genial: la democracia es el peor de los sistemas, exceptuando a todos los demás.
And I want to quote Winston Churchill to say that democracy is the worst system except for the rest of the systems that have been tried.
El comunismo, sin dudas, no admite discusión. Es el peor de los sistemas que haya conocido la raza humana en los últimos 200 años.
Communism doesn't admit debate. It's the worst system that the human race have faced in the past 200 years.
No solamente son un peligro para los pueblos que lo sufren, constantemente están acechando, están tratando de llevar y hacer triunfar esa nefasta ideología en otras naciones, en naciones libres y democráticas.
It is not only a danger for those who live under communism currently, but also for nations that are free and democratic, because communist countries still try to impose their ideology on others.
Por eso la importancia de la labor que realiza esta fundación y naciones como Lituania y los Estados Unidos.
This is why the work of Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation and governments like the United States and Lithuania is so important.
Por eso la importancia de la solidaridad con las víctimas del comunismo.
That's why it's so important to solidarize with the victims of communism.
Por eso la importancia de que Estados Unidos y Lituania, con otros socios, puedan articular una fuerza verdaderamente efectiva en la lucha contra el comunismo, en la lucha para impedir que sigan causando dolor y sufrimiento y extendiéndose por otras naciones.
That's why it's so important, the work of the United States and Lithuania in team, let's say, with other countries to stop communism from spreading.
Gracias a todos ustedes y a otros muchos amigos solidarios, hoy puedo estar aquí con vida. Así que le quedo muy agradecido en mi nombre, en el de mi familia y en el nombre de los presos políticos que sobreviven en terribles condiciones en las cárceles de Cuba. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm here thanks to the solidarity and help of friends and organizations and in the name of other political prisoners that are suffering in Cuba. Thank you very much.
Después de los aplausos creo que la traducción era necesaria. Todo el mundo me entendía muy bien en español.